Hello, everybody. My name is Adam, and I'm on a mission to become the most prolific reviewer of all time. And to do that, I review books, movies, podcasts, plays, whatever. Today, I'm reviewing the documentary My Father, the BTK Killer. And so, My Father, the BTK Killer, it revolves around the relationship between Dennis Radler, who was the BTK killer, and his daughter, Carrie Rawson. Um, and Carrie Rawson is an interesting person because she has written a lot about her father and her relationship with her father because what happened when Dennis, what is his name again? Dennis Rader was arrested is his wife and his daughter and son had really no idea that he was this serial killer. And so they actually had good relationships with each other, at least according to Carrie Rawson, the daughter. And she was devastated because she loved her dad. So you have this kind of horrible situation where you love somebody, but you don't really know them because they have this completely other side to them. And the the documentary, it does talk a lot about how it's kind of in two parts. It's but they happen simultaneously. So the first part is trying to catch BTK, and then the second part is how the daughter kind of came to terms with her father's her father's existence as a serial killer throughout her life. And I don't think that there's any conclusions, even though the documentary wants to make a conclusion, because the last scene is basically Carrie with her friends, and Carrie's friends saying something like, "Oh, you don't need to feel guilty. You had nothing to do with it. You need to move on with your life." And Carrie's like, "Yes, yes, I know." But so she has a choice, though, either to talk about it, in which case people think that she is um, benefiting from that relationship, even though she is clearly and her family clearly were victims of this man, like everybody else, but in a different sense. Or she can kind of ignore it and then push it down and bury it and repress it, and that's also not great. So there's not any good solution for her in this situation. Um, I think eventually people will just not be interested in this case because a lot of the people who were affected by the case are still alive. So when she's an older woman, people won't care. I think it will just be like, "Oh, your father was a serial killer. That's odd. How was that?" You know. And I think that's one part of it, but I think the other part of this story that was interesting for me and not really commented on the film at all is Dennis Radler, I think, was a pretty unique serial killer because he went through this time in his life in the 70s where things were not going well. And so he had this like crazy fantasy of murder and violence. So he became a serial killer and he started killing people. And then he met his wife and he got married and he had a child and he settled down and he stopped killing people. And when his children were grown up, that's when he started again. And there's also this kind of question. I'm not quite sure about the timeline, but it seemed like after about 20 years, there was this on television in Kansas, because this happened in Kansas mostly. There was like, "Oh, this serial killer disappeared. Is he in prison? Did he die? But definitely he's not a problem anymore. And that kind of, I don't want to say that's the reason why he killed people, but it was a motivating factor because he thought that he was being forgotten and he wanted people to remember his work, um, which is kind of sick. It is sick. And it's interesting about serial killers is why, how can they be like, I never know why serial killers are not all innocent by reasons of insanity and then just locked in an institution for the criminally insane if they have those anymore, because there's no sane reason to be a serial killer. There's none, right? Because other crimes you can have rational motivations for. Like if you're a bank robber and you shoot a security guard because you're trying to get away, that's kind of self preservation, right? So that's not an ideal situation for anybody, but it kind of makes sense. But if you are stalking people and murdering them and doing weird things to them, that's not normal. That's not rational. So it doesn't make any sense for me why he is not considered to be insane. I just think our categories of insanity are limited, you know, because he probably isn't schizophrenic, right? Or he doesn't have any mental disorders, apart from the fact that he's a serial killer, which is a mental disorder. So I don't know. I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist, but I would say in 20, 30 years, we'll have like a clinical definition of, you know, antisocial, violent person or something like that. And somebody like BTK will fit in it. And I don't think that that necessarily excuses everything he did. It doesn't, obviously. But, you know, then there was this part where the daughter goes to the prison, and by her account, they had a good relationship. So the father is really excited to see his daughter, and she's like, Dad, did you do this? Did you do this? And he's like, No, no, I only did 10. And he gets really upset by this. And then they have like this conversation about her trying to exploit his legacy or whatever, in his opinion, which was kind of a dumb thing to say, but you know, she says something like, That man is not my father, and I never want to see that man again. And it's weird because that man is your father, and all of your memories of that man that are positive are your father as well. And just because your father does some horrible things, it doesn't prevent him from being your, or stop him rather from being your father. And that doesn't mean that she needs to have a relationship with him if she doesn't want to, because why would you want to have a relationship with a serial killer? It's just, it's really interesting psychological phenomenon, right? Because I think that we all have flaws, right? And if you have children, you want your children to love you despite of your flaws and vice versa. And there are, though, like, you always wonder, what is the limit, you know? What is the limit of a parent-child love? Like, I know that there are things that I would never do because I don't want to do them and they would break that trust. But if my child found out someday that I was a serial killer, I'm not a serial killer, like, obviously they would look at me in a different perspective. And if I found out that they were serial killers, how would that react? How would I react to that? You know? So it's such a weird question that thankfully we don't have to think about because we're not in that situation, you know? Yeah. Anyway, I thought that it was an interesting documentary. It's not like, it's not a must see documentary or whatever, but it does raise that interesting question. Like, what would you do if you found out somebody you loved was a serial killer? So, what would you do if you found out somebody you loved was a serial killer? Put your thoughts in the comment section below. Like and subscribe. Thank you. Bye bye.